Hello there, people. Welcome to another episode of Flight Chat, the listener feedback show for the FLITEcast. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me. Do we have anything to talk about this week other than the Acolyte disaster? I certainly hope so. I know that we're going to continue to talk about that, and that's definitely going to be top of mind for a little while now. You know, when it comes to anything about movies, TV, and other sort of media, it is definitely the topic of the day. But there are other things that we most certainly can discuss, and our listeners this week certainly are no stranger to that. We will begin, as we customarily do, with John, his first email of the show, titled Responses, Plans, and Questions. He says, as far as Hal saying hi Cal to Soups and Soups saying hi Hal to Jordan, I don't think of it as campy. I just want the DCU to be more casual with its crossovers. This was with respect to a suggestion that he had for what things that he wanted to see in the DCU last week, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Some more levity and some more hilarity and whatnot. No, I hear what you're saying. I mean, it just depends with respect to, you know, what tone they decide to go in with respect to the DCU. And I don't think we're going to know, truthfully, until that first trailer. That first trailer for Superman, that first teaser for Superman, we'll find out. And we're not that far away from it, believe it or not. New York Comic Con will be here before you know it, and then CCXP after that. We're going to start seeing some marketing, no doubt. They're in post-production. Gunn has made it very clear that they've been editing throughout the process of principal photography, and they're continuing to go now. Their visual effects has been working at the same time. So yeah, we're going to see some stuff here in the not too distant future. So we'll get an idea, at least at the beginning here, of what their tone of the DCU is going to be, at least for Superman, right? At least as far as how the architect of the DCU, creatively James Gunn, is posturing it. That doesn't mean that all the other directors are going to do exactly the same, but they will be doing movies that will fit into the same umbrella as the DCU. So we'll see. We will see. But continuing, John says, someone in the chat mentioned traveling to Europe. Yes, that was Alex. Alex Da Silva mentioned his jaunt to Europe, which I think he talked about all of it. He may have a few more details to share with us in his email for this week. But at any rate, John says, well, since my relationship is ending, instead of being worried about renting a place in December, I'm going to try and join a program in Japan and do a work exchange there for a while. It's been my dream to go there, and I think it will help me heal from the breakup, and it'll cause me to feel less depressed and lonely, plus maybe it'll help me cut back my internet issue. Perhaps. I don't know how social media and the internet goes over in Japan, how it is handled there, or how much different it is. I mean, the internet is worldwide, of course, and I feel like anybody can, join any social media groupings, and regardless. I feel like a decent amount of my audience, truthfully, is overseas, to be honest with you. I don't know about Japan, but yeah, perhaps. I mean, it just depends on what the social media makeup is over there. Again, I don't really know, but I have heard amazing things about Japan. I know plenty of people that have gone and made return trips, visit there, vacation there, some that have lived there. So yeah, I've heard nothing but great things about Japan. Seriously, it's one of those that maybe on a bucket list, perhaps, if I really want to make that very, very, very long flight, might be able to do that. But hey, absolutely, I wouldn't discourage anybody from wanting to relocate and, start fresh. If traveling abroad, maybe, a good fresh start for you, John, absolutely, so be it, without a doubt. Go ahead, take that plunge. Safely, of course. Safe travels indeed for you, good sir, if that is the case. But on to John's questions. He's got 3 questions for this week. His first question, what type of credentials do you need to have to work at a TV station? Well, truthfully, John, it depends on market, because for me, when I first started at my TV station, the first TV station I was in, the market was between market 70 and market 80. And market size isn't about popularity, it's about population size more than anything, audience size, if you will. And so when you work in a smaller market, like basically what it is you put a decent amount of years of experience in a smaller market, and that can help you qualify to, graduate, if you will, up to a bigger market, right? And this wasn't just how television stations operate, but also how old newspaper print used to operate as well. I remember when I was a co-editor-in-chief at my college newspaper way back when, I went to a one-day symposium at the New York Times for college editors and for college newspaper staff. And this was, the New York Times itself was such a more reputable, more respectable operation back in the early 2000s than the absolute tortured rag that it is now. But, beyond that, the operation was very different and expectations were extremely different for anybody coming out of college with any type of communications or journalism degree. The idea was that you would spend 5 years working at a weekly paper, in a different market. And then after that, at least 5 years experience could get you to working at a daily paper, and then so on and so forth, right? And that depended on market and whether you got to work for USA Today or a national paper, Newsweek, anything like that. So it was gradual in that regard. So for me, I worked at that old market television station, the one that was, in market, between market 70 to 80. I worked there for 10 years. And that 10 years of experience, in engineering and creative services is what really helped me get the job. That, and also, having a number of coworkers, vouch for me that went to the station that I'm at now. But that experience is what allowed me to now work for what I think we're market 14. Detroit is the market 14th market in the country in that regard. So that's what it is. It's really about experience, right? Not necessarily credentials, but experience. And it also depends on what aspect you want to work in, because there's news, there's engineering, there's creative services, there's sales. Like there's more than a few different departments at any of these TV stations, and it just depends on which one you have a passion for and which one you build your experience in. But the amount of experience that you have in a smaller market definitely translates and helps you build towards, working in a bigger market. That's what I would say. So it's gradual in that regard. And it can take a while. And it also can take opportunity knocking in that regard, depending on a new operation popping up or an old one cleaning house, which is sad for the people that are leaving, but could be an opportunity for somebody looking for a new job if a new administration wants to take over in that regard. So that's the best answer that I can give you, I think, comprehensively for that one. Question 2. He asks, in the article comparing Deadpool and Wolverine to The Flash, someone left a comment that, quote, DC should just stop making movies, end quote. Do you think that narrative could go away if the DCU is a success? I'm sure some trolls will still pretend that the competition is one-sided, but I hope that they get drowned out. Well, first of all, John, they are getting drowned out, because under no circumstances is Hollywood ever going to abandon making DC movies. Even if we reached a point where there were no more theatrical releases and everything went streaming, which I know makes people's skin crawl just me saying that, they will still make DC movies, because there's too much of a pattern, too much of a history of success, especially when it comes to Batman, right? As I've mentioned many times, Batman movies do not fail at the box office, with the possible exception of Batman and Robin, and even then somebody could make a case. But every other Batman movie that has released since 1989 has succeeded, right? And in some cases, massively succeeded when it comes to the Dark Knight trilogy, at least the last two films. Films 2 and 3 of the Dark Knight trilogy. The Batman is a massive success, obviously, and would have made closer to $1 billion if it hadn't had the 45-day release window. We were talking about that recently, because I wasn't suggesting, I think Anthony or somebody was saying, didn't you say that the Batman would have done better? Well, that's not to say that it did badly. It most certainly did not. It did very well, to be very honest with you. In 45 days, it just would have done better. And I think there were also some complications with the China release, if I'm not mistaken, as well. So, but the fact of the matter is, John, DC does not perform poorly at the box office on average. It just doesn't. Okay, the trolls can tout 2023 all they want, and they can look at everything under the Hamada reign with the exception of Aquaman. Aquaman is $1 billion earner, at least that first one. And then the second one made, a little over half of that, if I'm not mistaken, right? But, that was in the throes of the DCEU's farewell tour, if you will. So the idea that it's such a loud narrative of DC ceasing to make movies, no, that's never going to go anywhere. That falls on massively deaf ears. Studio executives will never listen to that, ever, ever, ever. No, it would, at the very least, at worst, John, at worst, DC would just make Batman movies, which is what they were doing. They'd just go back to making Batman movies, and that's it. Batman and Superman movies. That's it, right? They did that for 34 years. They made nothing but Batman and Superman movies from 1978 up until, recent years, within the last 10 to 15 years. And they would just go back to doing that because they already have historical proof and data that shows that those two characters make money at the box office. They expect that with Superman, and I find it very difficult to believe that Superman won't make money. It's just a question of how much money the movie will make next year, and we will find that out. But whatever narrative that these trolls want to put forth that DC should stop making movies, it'll never happen. I would put money on that, John. It will never happen. DC will always make movies. Okay, there's just too much history. So that narrative's already drowned out. Absolutely 100% drowned out. It doesn't matter. So either way. And your third and final question for this week: was Zaslav allowing the creation of DC Studios the best thing he's ever done? If not, what is, and what's also the worst thing? Well, I think the worst thing is clearly the Batgirl situation, and also actually, you know what? There could be an argument for this. I'll bring up Brooklyn Batman here, because Brooklyn Batman has been big, the other Anthony, has been big on, really punishing Zaslav for this whole losing the NBA deal. And that is a massive, massive blow to Warner Brothers Discovery. Losing the NBA contract, so no more NBA on TNT, TBS, any of that. That is a horrible, that's horribly short-sighted. And one could absolutely argue that is just as, if not more destructive than the Batgirl write-off or the Coyote versus Acme write-off. Because at least with Batgirl and Coyote versus Acme, you're only alienating, us, the fans, and you're alienating creatives in Hollywood that can't trust you in terms of them making a project with you. And that's more than enough. Like, that's too many already to be alienating. But when you take away NBA licensing, that is millions of fans. That is millions of fans that are used to watching Shaq and Charles Barkley and Ernie and all these others. For people that are NBA fans, you may not be an NBA fan, John, and maybe not everybody here is an NBA fan, but live sports is massive, especially in the United States. And the NBA is also an international game, plenty of Chinese, Serbian, French players everywhere, of different nationalities, right? So when you take away a brand staple like the NBA on TNT over the last 20, 30 years, that's horrible. That is a massive, massive setback. And I cannot imagine that the shareholders are terribly happy about that. And David Zaslav's, his seat should be red hot at this point. It most certainly should. So I could absolutely see an argument that is the worst thing that he has done. And maybe you don't care, John. Maybe movie fans and people, the regular nerds that don't get into sports ball don't care. But that is arguably the biggest blunder that he has made so far, is letting the NBA go. Horrible, horrible decision. So, and if not that, then just say Batgirl and Coyote versus Acme, the write-offs. Those are the bad decisions. But I think obviously DC Studios is his best decision to this point. And really, I can't even 100% give him credit, because it was a no-brainer at that point. After seeing the difficulty and the failure from the Walter Hamada era, and after seeing what Toby Emmerich and Jeff Johns and John Berg and the previous regimes, just seeing them lay waste to DC Films as a rinky-dink division under Warner Brothers Picture Group, it was the most logical choice to have DC become its own studio structurally. It had to be done. Absolutely had to be done. If you were going to build a new franchise, you're going to build a new universe, you had to give them that autonomy. It had to be done. And we're still cautiously optimistic as to whether or not it will work. Most of us are. But yeah, that I think is clearly David Zaslav's best decision. I can't imagine what would be comparable to that. Anybody else want to stump for David Zaslav and think of something that, better that he could have done? I mean, you're welcome to submit it. You're welcome to suggest it. But I think, in many ways, objectively speaking, DC Studios, the creation of that, is the best thing that David Zaslav has done to this point. So, it's a very, very, very short list at this point, to be honest with you, in terms of best things that he has done. So, yep, those are my answers for that. Thank you, as always, John, for the feedback. It is indeed greatly appreciated. Best of luck to you, sir, and, in your continued healing and moving forward in life and work and whatnot. All right, next up, Waliyu Mustafa has a pair of emails this week. The first one is very much with respect to a most recent Patreon episode. I did a rant, if you will. It wasn't Friday Flight, I think it was Flight Speed. I think it was on the way home from work, where I talked about a particular old frenemy, I guess is the best way I could put it. A frenemy that I used to go back and forth with on Twitter has found his way to Threads. And he posted something that I took exception to, and I immediately, I screenshot it, I responded to it on Threads. I blocked him because I really don't have time for any of this person's nonsense any further. And then, I recorded a Flight Speed rant about it. So Wally, you, of course, being a very loyal patron, thank you so much, Wally. You listened to it and definitely wanted to share his thoughts on it, because this is about Superman. It's absolutely about Wallyu's favorite DC character. And so he titled this email, "Some Mofos Are Still Trying to Ice Skate Uphill," which, of course, is a Blade reference, but it works perfectly here. So This is Wallyu's first email talking about Superman. He says, "Hey Ray, it seems people are still not understanding who or what Superman is. When I heard your latest Flight Speed episode, it was just eye-rolling over the Threads post you mentioned. First of all, the fact that the account is called Superman on Film tells you all you need to know." Yes, that is the account on Threads. If people wish to seek this out, you probably already know who I'm talking about. Walliu says, "Now maybe this person has read Superman comics, but it sounds like they haven't read enough to really understand just how morally conflicted Superman has been." That's what this was about. Superman on Film, the account, posted not all, but just the very convenient portion, the cherry-picked portion of the quote that Christopher Reeve made about Superman not being morally conflicted. And I took issue with that because I thought it flew completely in the face of the moral confliction that Superman, literally Christopher Reeve's version of Superman, is in for the first 3 out of his 4 movies in that regard. And so Walliu says, "You asked about the quote from Christopher Reeve, so I went looking for it. I have added the full quote below." All right. So here is the full quote that I'm going to read for people just for the context of what I'm talking about and the rest of Walliu's email response here. Here's the quote from Christopher Reeve. He said, "I've made no secret about my distaste for Superman 3. I enjoyed filming it, but I was very unsatisfied with the result. Playing bad Superman was interesting, and there's a scene in the first act where Superman does his heroics at a chemical plant. That's really strong. The rest, not so much. But what I tried to convey in playing bad Superman was that he's not truly evil. In fact, he's a much darker character before that scene in the junkyard because he's conflicted. There's still good in him trying to get out. Once he gets Clark Kent out of him, that's when Superman becomes truly bad. There's nothing left. So that was the fun part as an actor. I tried to show nuance. That's the thing about Superman is he can have doubts, he can show his humanity, but he's not a morally conflicted character. He's not Shakespearean. If you make him morally conflicted, that goes beyond even bad Superman. Now you've lost the character." End quote. That was Christopher Reeve on Bad Superman in Superman 3. This was in a conversation with Daniel Lamont at the London Times in late 1984. So I had the part of this that Superman on Film shared was only the part from "that's the thing about Superman is he can have doubts, he can show his humanity." That was the only part of the quote. Everything up to "if you make him morally conflicted, that goes beyond even bad Superman, now you've lost the character," right? That was what Superman on Film cherry-picked, and that's what a number of the other Superman and the Reeve gatekeepers cherry-picked for their quote. So they ignored the entirety of the quote number 1 in that regard, right? So eschew all of that context. And on top of that, I guessed, even based on the cherry-picked part of the quote, my guess was that this had to have come either around after Superman 3 or after Superman 4. I figured it was a quote that came later on, because there's no way that he could have said anything about Superman not being morally conflicted after the first 2 Superman movies, and certainly not the third one. So to me, I'm like, well, he had to have changed his mind and felt this way after doing the first 3. And not so much that he changed his mind, maybe he did, but this quote definitely, as I said, 1984, after Superman 3. So yeah, the moral confliction that I absolutely pointed out on Threads that he most certainly engages in the first 3 movies is absolutely there. But here, let's get into the rest of Walliu's email. He says, "What I find most interesting is how Superman on Film completely ignores the first part of the quote. Chris was referring to Superman 3 and the experience he had playing bad Superman. Maybe if you shared the whole quote and not just the part you feel is justify your argument, perhaps you wouldn't look like such an idiot." Well, the person that runs the Superman on Film account has really not had an issue with looking like an idiot the last number of years. I'll just put it that way, unfortunately. Walliu says, "It was good of you to point out the obvious moments Superman has been morally conflicted across the first 3 Superman movies, and it's amazing how people will either dismiss that or pretend they never saw it happen. People talk about Superman not being morally conflicted. Just look at how his parents react to him wanting to give up his powers for Lois. In the downer cut of Superman 2, you will remember the scene where Clark sacrifices his powers, and we see Jor-El turn to look at Lois with an angry look as if he was telling her, quote, 'I know it's his choice, but it doesn't mean I like it. If anything happens to him, I'm holding you personally responsible,' end quote. Whereas in the lesser version, Lara is more soft and gentle and understanding of what her son is willing to give up to be with the woman he loves." Yeah, but it just really briefly, Walliu, in that regard, because this goes back to an old conversation. One of the very first episodes of Squadcast movies on the Squadcast Media Patreon that I did, it was me, Tim, and Scott talking about Superman 2, and we watched both cuts, right? We watched the Lester cut and the Donner cut. I don't know if you ever got a chance to listen to this, Walliu, but it's one of the more infamous episodes of Squadcast movies because it was very early on. I was still getting to know Tim and Scott, and I came at them with the perspective of the Lester cut being better than the Donner cut in a number of ways that they disagreed with me on. And Scott to this day, Scott disagrees with me on this, and this scene in particular. And I laid out a very specific argument as to why I thought the Lester cut was better, because what you just said, while you were in the Lester version, Lara is more soft and gentle and understanding of what her son is willing to give up to be with the woman he loves. I agree with you, Wally, because the way that the Lester cut portrays it, the Donner cut, it's just all Jor-El, right? And it's Jor-El begrudgingly doing it, and he stares daggers into Lois for him making that choice, right? And then later, he gives him the powers back, right? In the Lester cut, he goes to ask Lara, his mother, to give up the powers because Jor-El won't. Jor-El won't do it. Jor-El knows it's a horrible idea, it's a bad idea, and that, not even just that Earth is at risk, but his son is at risk by doing this. But he's going to let him learn the hard lesson. So Mom will do it. Dad will be like, you know what, I'll let him earn this knowledge in that regard, right? And so that's why it goes that way in the Lester cut. But it's the same lesson. And it's not only the same lesson, it's also the same moral confliction. In both cases, Superman is depowering himself to sleep with Lois. In both cases, he is putting not only his safety, but the safety of the Earth at risk just so that he can have sex with Lois Lane, whether it in either cut of the movie, right? So either way, he's morally conflicted in both cases. But I just wanted to bring that up because I love the distinction. And I do enjoy and own both versions, obviously. The Steelbook set that I bought for the Donner cut of Superman films, it keeps all of the Reeves Superman continuum, if you will. You get both the Lester cut and the Donner cut of Superman 2 in that regard. So, obviously I think the Donner cut overall is a little bit better? Yeah, but they both do the same thing with respect to moral confliction. It's just different the way that they present it in either film in that regard. But moving on to the rest of Wally U's email, he says, and to then have other people go on about how Zack Snyder, quote, butchered Superman, and that he doesn't understand the character, that's wrong. He understood the character. That's why he made him flawed and put him in a real-world situation. Even in BVS, during the montage of Superman saving people, we're told how people have been crying out for a savior, and when he finally arrives, we want him to abide by our rules and laws. Well, as Clark Kent, he can do that, but as Superman, he has to figure out, what do people want from him? What do people think of him? He is just a guy trying to do the right thing, but some people are not buying into that, and when he sees and hears this, it makes him conflicted. It makes him question, should he even bother helping anyone? All this after he saved the world from being terraformed in Man of Steel. Like Martha tells him, Wally says, people hate what they don't understand. Be their monument, be their savior, or be none of it. You don't owe these people a thing. And guess what? He sacrifices himself to save the world. Even though some of the public didn't want him around or were unsure about him, but when they learned of his sacrifice, they changed their outlook about him. Even Bruce F. and Wayne saw him in a different light. Still think he's not morally conflicted, Wally says. What about when he wanted to save Jonathan Kent in Man of Steel? He didn't care if people saw him display his powers, but his dad did care. He didn't want him to reveal himself so soon. He wasn't ready. Add to this, what happened in the car before the tornado arrived? Clark yells at Jonathan saying he's not his dad but was in the process of apologizing, but he didn't get to fully do it. So imagine the guilt he must have felt after the tornado takes Jonathan. Jonathan also saw what happened when Clark was younger as his powers were beginning to develop, when he wanted to take out the bullies but knew he couldn't. Tell me as a human being you have not been in that situation. Isn't that what it means to be morally conflicted? Yes, I 1000% agree with all of the evidence that you were presenting to the court here, Wally, no doubt. He says, I think Superman on film needs to just be honest with themselves going forward. They're too much of a gatekeeper of Superman the movie, and it's obvious that they and others like them are not willing to break that mold and be more open-minded about the character, who he is, and what he stands for. Maybe they should read more comics to really understand what makes Superman morally conflicted. I couldn't agree more with you on that as well, Wally. You are also right about one other thing, he says, that when Superman releases next year, boy, are these gatekeepers going to make sure James Gunn knows how they feel about it if there's nothing to resemble Christopher Reeve's portrayal. Me, on the other hand, I'll just be hella excited that a new Superman movie is being released, and I will be there day one, front and center, enjoying the hell out of it. Thank you, Wally Mustafa. Wally, you were preaching to the choir. You were speaking the truth here with respect to Superman and how he is portrayed. And yeah, we already know, and this goes back to the fact that, and again, it is so just staggering to think of this, but that's why I keep saying it, because to understand or to really process that David Corenswet is only going to be the third cinematic interpretation of Superman that we will have ever seen in our lifetimes, right? Since 1978, right? So we're talking from Gen X through Millennials, through Gen Z, into Gen Alpha. It has only ever been Christopher Reeve and Henry Cavill until now, and next year we will get David Corenswet. 3. That is where a lot of this angst and a lot of this gatekeeping and pearl clutching comes from, because unlike Batman, unlike Spider-Man, we have not been given multiple versions of Superman as a character for different generations and for different audiences to glom onto. This is now finally starting, right? And television doesn't count. Clearly television doesn't count, because we don't hear people talk about Dean Cain. We don't hear people talk about Tyler Hoechlin. We don't hear people talk about Tom Welling, for that matter, right? You know, because did he ever wear the cape? And I think there might have been some, I don't remember. I know that's, he never officially became it in the show, but there have always been allusions and like images of that in that regard, right? So, you know, it's difficult in that regard, but I still say that it doesn't excuse the closed-mindedness. It doesn't excuse the gatekeeping of fans, but it's just one of those incredibly eye-opening things where it's like, how could this possibly always come up with Superman and it doesn't come up with any other character? Like, even with Batman, right? People argue the no-kill rule with Batman, but they still have a favorite version, right? And it's more than just 2, right? It's not just a battle of, you know, Keaton versus Bale or Bale versus Affleck. No, there are Keaton fans, there are Bale fans, there are Affleck fans, there are now Pattinson fans, right? And that's just those 4 in that regard, right? I'm sure there's a Kilmer contingent somewhere out there for Batman Forever. I'll bet there's a Clooney contingent. I don't know where, a couple of people, but I guarantee that there's a Clooney contingent out there. And there's an Adam West contingent as well, because technically he counts, because he did have a theatrically released film in 1966 in that regard, right? But the fact of the matter is, however you argue about Batman on screen, there's been so many interpretations of the character that not only are we willing to, you know, defend one and as a favorite against others, but on top of that, that's because there have been so many. That's when we will bring in Kevin Conroy. And don't forget Kevin Conroy. Let's talk about what, you know, Bruce Greenwood. I mean, fans will talk about Bruce Greenwood. I don't. Either way, the fact of the matter is, we just don't have that luxury with Superman yet, and that's why a lot of this gatekeeping is happening. But it's still unacceptable, and it's still ridiculous, and it's still very closed-minded. And yes, Superman on film is one of those accounts that is extremely closed-minded. It was one of those cases where I knew he was on Threads. I gave him the benefit of the doubt initially and was like, all right, let's see where he goes and how often he pops up in my For You feed. And then when that popped up, I went, okay, you know what? Screenshot this, respond to it, block his ass. Because I'm just, nope, I'm not here for it. I'm not here for that level of toxicity and that level of gatekeeping. I'm just not. And he is an individual that I have spoken to. He is an individual that, again, frenemies. That's the best way that I could put it. Frenemies on Twitter. And I am just not interested in his brand of gatekeeping pretentiousness any further. I'm not. Not whatsoever. He still talks to plenty of mutuals, I'm sure, although I don't know. I really am not 100% certain on that. But yeah, I am not interested. So, you know, it is what it is. But that was the entire subject of Wallyu's first email, because he most certainly a couple of days later had some thoughts to share with respect to what he talked about in his second email. And it is titled, "You Come for One of Us, You Come for All of Us." And he sent this a couple of days later, and he says, well, damn, that actually happened. Before I add my thoughts to the news, take a look at this post I found on Threads and its response by one Simu Liu. Yes, here we go. This is Acolyte talk we're getting into here, people. So, on Threads, there was an account, RJ Din WSNC, that posted, "Why does Lucasfilm allow the extreme cyberbullying of its actors? Ewan McGregor had to step in personally to tell people to shut the F up and leave Moses Ingram alone. Kelly Marie Tran, Daisy Ridley, John Boyega, and now Amandla Stenberg, and Lucasfilm is absolutely silent. How do they expect to get people to sign on to projects with them when they allow the worst of society to come for their actors?" And Simu Liu's response to this that Wally posted here is, quote, "I do feel like studios often do not take into account the human cost of thrusting a bunch of actors into the global spotlight. In today's online environment, massive amounts of hate, cyberbullying, people piling on to just be relevant, it's inevitable. I do believe," he says, "there can be more support from the studio side. mental health resources provided for the actors, and just any sort of guidance of how to navigate the aftermath of being thrust into a massive moment of visibility, end quote. I 100% echo Simu Liu's sentiments there, and I know he's speaking from a very personal standpoint with respect to that and how he feels about it as well, with respect to his own personal situations. But with respect to Wally Yu's email here, he says, it's the final sentence in the original post that does it for me. If you are an actor or creative of an ethnic minority, do you really want to associate yourself with a studio that doesn't even stand up for the morals of the people they hire? They are human beings, not robots. They too have a life to live and mouths to feed and bills to pay, but I would be damned if I were to work for a company that has such a bad record as Disney does. And Simu himself is not wrong, Wally Yu says. More mental health resources definitely need to be available to people, and while it is all well and good telling people to tread carefully on social media, how about we make sure those racists and bigots don't get the limelight in the first place? Block and report. If it gets to the stage of being overwhelming, the studio needs to step in and take the necessary steps to reprimand those trolls. It's a hate crime at the end of the day, plain and simple. I completely 100% agree with that, Wally Yu. And, going back to what you said with, you would be damned if you're going to work for a company that has such a bad record as Disney does. Well, unfortunately, when it comes to creatives and, actors, especially in Hollywood, what choice do they have? You're not, because it's, essentially a gig economy, if you will, you can't afford to turn down work in that regard, right? You want to keep working, so, because if you turn down work, well, now you have a reputation among studio heads, among, agents, among, producers. It's like, well, that person wouldn't work here, that person wouldn't work there, that person's going to be considered difficult. And it's even more a double-edged sword, even more so with minorities, especially minority women, because then there's already a stipulation, there's already this stereotype that minorities and minority women are difficult in the first place. Whenever you put the word difficult in front of them, well, now that's essentially a blacklist. That is essentially, well, now nobody will work with them because they're considered a diva, they're considered a challenge, they're too much of a headache to deal with. And it's disgusting and it's racist and it's extremely bigoted. But again, it's how Hollywood operates, and a lot of times actors of color, creators of color can't afford to have that black mark on them, and so they will take the work, and they'll, regardless of what punishment Disney is going to give them. Now, with respect to all the Star Wars actors, I think Amandla Stenberg, on some level, probably, of course she knows about what happened with John Boyega, what happened with Moses Ingram, what happened with Kelly Marie Tran. Most certainly she knows. Whether she believed that was going to happen to her or not, I don't know. So I don't know how prepared for it she was, but the fact of the matter is she shouldn't have had to prepare for it at all. It's not something that should be part of her repertoire. What are you going to put that in the contract? And if you do put that in the contract, well, there better be some type of clause, some type of defense clause or something in that regard, if they're going to do that, because this is a pattern now. This is 100% a pattern that we have seen specifically with black actors in Lucasfilm projects, right? In Star Wars projects, right? It started with John Boyega being a black stormtrooper. Then it went to Kelly Marie Tran being an Asian character that a lot of the haters in the fandom menace didn't like in The Last Jedi. Then it goes into Moses Ingram playing a black Sith Inquisitor, black female Sith Inquisitor in Obi-Wan Kenobi, and all of the nastiness that Ewan McGregor came out and absolutely spoke out against, which, fantastic on Ewan McGregor for being such a massive ally to Moses Ingram in that moment. He did a phenomenal job, and he's still aces for that, no doubt about it, even though he shouldn't have had to do it. And Lucasfilm didn't do anything officially for it. And now you have Amandla Stenberg. And yeah, for all the people, again, as I mentioned the other day, for all the people that want to act like race and bigotry has nothing to do with this, one look at Amandla Stenberg's Instagram comments will shut your ass up. Seriously. You have no leg to stand on if you're still arguing that you can't do that race has nothing to do with it, that bigotry has nothing to do with it. Most certainly absolutely does, and it's disgusting and it's awful and it's horrible, and it is a hate crime. It's disgusting. And the fact that anybody would do this, whether they mean it or not, is morally reprehensible. No doubt about it. But going back to Wally Yu's email, he says, I feel so bad for Manny Jacinto, though. He appears at D23 to talk about how much he enjoyed in being in the Acolyte, and then this happens. On his birthday of all days. Yes, his 37th birthday is when the stupid-ass Deadline article came out. Yep. And then he shared that pic on Threads, and it just cemented my sadness for him and Amandla Stenberg even further. People don't know the picture that Manny Jacinto posted. It's literally the cover image for the last episode of FLITEcast with thunderous applause, which is the other end of the quote from Padme, the Patreon rant that I absolutely launched into about the Acolyte's cancellation. is called So This Is How Liberty Dies, and the censored version, if you will, for FLITEcast is called With Thunderous Applause. And it is the picture that Manny Jacinto posted on Threads that absolutely is the cover for that. He says, Wally Youth says, the stories that show was going to tell. All the seeds were planted, but the racists and bigots had to make their voices known. They made Disney buckle under their pressure, and it flippin' worked. Thanks, guys. Now all we're getting for the next decade or so are white male leads going forward. Just what I always wanted. Yeah, white male leads named Skywalker, or connected to Skywalker, I might add, for that fact, Wally you. He said, your Son Just Don't rant was absolutely spot on. That's what it was. It was an episode of Son Just Don't on Patreon. He said, I felt your anger throughout. Other than what I have said so far, I don't feel there is anything more to add to this. That being said, it would be very interesting to see how many people end up canceling their Disney Plus subscriptions as a result of this, and then Disney will sit there wondering how they lost so many subscribers. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I have nothing more to add. Thank you, Waliyu Mustafa. Oh, you added quite a bit, Waliyu, and you echoed all the same sentiments that I've been echoing for sure. And this is not going away. You've got Screen Rant, you've got Rolling Stones, you've got other articles, you've got other writers, at these trades and these verified accounts talking about this is a terrible idea, this is awful, and the fandom menace really needs to get a grip and, understand that the Star Wars that they were looking for has never existed and is not what they're familiar with because they're being unreasonable, and now this is just going to push Disney into, the laziest of safest plans, which is nothing but Skywalker Saga. We don't need to branch out. We don't need to do anything more adventurous. We don't need to flesh out this universe beyond the Skywalkers any further because clearly that's not safe. Yeah, based on the racists and the bigots, right? Never mind the rest of the audience. Never mind those of us that thoroughly enjoy the show, and that's why I signed the petition. I did. I signed the Change.org petition because I don't believe, if you ask me, is it going to go anywhere? I don't have the utmost confidence that it will, but in the event that it does, in the event that this really does pressure Disney into realizing, hey, you screwed up. You massively screwed up listening to a bunch of loud nerd maggot morons. A lot of loud nerd maggots in that regard. You listen to them ahead over the rest of us, over the actual diversity that your audience makes up with respect to going forward with this show. Get your heads out of your asses and figure some shit out and do the right thing. Because at this point, it is the right thing. It is kind of a moral imperative with respect to this. It is about doing the right thing in that regard. So, you know what? It is what it is. We'll see. Again, I don't know how far it'll go, but I think we've all made our perspectives and our points and our positions known on this in that regard. And we're going to continue talking about it. It's going to continue to be top of mind. It's going to continue to be something that comes up. And you know what? For all of the, just again, all of you, just a fair warning to everyone. When you see the trolls come and attack the Acolyte and talk about bad writing and bad this and bad numbers and bad that, pay close attention. See how many followers those accounts have, especially on Threads. If it's less than 30 followers, that's a bot. That's a troll. Block and hide their ass. Seriously, they are not worth any of your time. They are not worth any of your energy. They are not even a real person. They're trying to forward a narrative for, controversy's sake, for attention's sake, whatever, click's sake, whatever the hell it is, and it's just supporting the laziness and the ridiculousness of Disney in that regard. So, yeah, block and hide their comments. Hide and block, right? You got to hide first, then block in that regard. So, yeah, we'll continue talking about it. We'll continue showing our thoughts, but for now, we'll table it, I guess, until something else pops up. But Wally, as always, thank you for the feedback, good sir. Thank you for the great emails about Superman and also about the Acolyte. Greatly appreciate it, good sir. All right, next up is Alex De Silva, who we mentioned earlier, was talking about his Europe trip, and he does have a few more tidbits to share, if you will. He said, hey, Ray, after concluding my Europe trip travelogue, I realized I left out two really cool things from London, so I'll very briefly include them here. He said, I went to the British Library, which in addition to being a library is also a museum. I saw the oldest existing copy of the Bible, almost 2 millennia old. It was amazing that something that ancient, was inches in front of me, separated only by a glass case. The other big ticket item here was the Magna Carta. It just looked like a piece of old parchment with barely illegible text, but it was so cool knowing an item with such historical importance for the country of England was right there before me. I don't know if you're a museum person, but that was all very, very cool. I don't know that I'd call myself a museum person because I don't seek them out myself, but I love going. Like if I go to a museum, I enjoy myself. I don't find museums boring. I do find museums very intriguing in that regard. So I don't necessarily, put forth the energy to seek them out at times, but when I am there, I most certainly enjoy myself. Like if somebody's like, hey, we're going to go to the museum. Oh yeah, all right, let's go, for sure, no doubt about it. So I probably would agree with you at how cool it would be to be in the presence of the oldest copy of the Bible and the Magna Carta, no doubt. He said the other really cool touristy thing I did was go to the Churchill War Rooms, which is basically a series of underground tunnels below London from where Winston Churchill directed the war effort against the Axis powers during World War II. A lot of the rooms were kept preserved and left untouched from when they were first deserted in the late 40s, which was really cool to see. It's literally a piece of history frozen in time. They were close, claustrophobic quarters, and we even got to see Churchill's bedroom where he slept a few times during the war. Very cool experience. Yeah, you know what? I would, as claustrophobic as I also tend to be at times, that would still be a cool thing to see. That would. To see a real life, it's just like going to like reenactments or going to like different sites where it's like, okay, here's where so-and-so sat or here's where so-and-so lived, that type of deal. Yes, I love that shit. Absolutely. I would thoroughly enjoy that. I wouldn't want to be there too long because, again, I'm not big on the claustrophobia of being like that far underground in that regard, but it is something that I think would be very cool to check out, no doubt. And he says, with that, I think I've gotten all the Europe talk out of my system. Thanks for indulging me. It's been fun to recount these tales. Well, it's all intriguing. It is. At least I think it's intriguing, and I think it's all subjective, and hopefully everybody else has gotten a kick out of it for sure, because it is something to share, no doubt about it. So he says, ever since coming back from the trip, I've had the urge to play my next Assassin's Creed game, so I fired up Unity, which takes place in France during the Revolution in the late 18th century. It looks like there's a chance Napoleon Bonaparte is connected to the main character of the game somehow, which means the Napoleon movie that came out last year just shot up to the top of my to-watch list, given I know almost nothing about Napoleon himself. Oh yeah, definitely. My knowledge of Napoleon, no joke, started with Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. It started there. And look, yes, it's Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, but that can lead you down a path of learning, hey, what was the deal with this French general? What was going on and all that? Which it did for me in that regard. So, yeah, I wouldn't say I'm an expert on Napoleon, but there's a decent amount that I do know about him. Would be curious to see Napoleon, see how that movie goes. But, yeah, Unity, man, I will not talk again about how behind I am on Assassin's Creed games. I will just say that I am still, whenever I do decide to get caught up, because I'm a completionist, I got to go back and finish Assassin's Creed 3 because I was halfway through that. And I also have this burning desire to go back and replay the Ezio trilogy because I really, really loved the Ezio trilogy. It was so good. So I don't know. We'll see. When will I have time to play video games, let alone watch all the other shit that is on my list? We'll see. But here, next up, Alex asks, have you ever seen the show Impractical Jokers? I've never seen the Dropout TV stuff, but it sounds like it's in a similar vein to Impractical Jokers. Impractical Jokers is nothing less than the greatest hidden camera prank show of all time, and it's not even close. It's my favorite show ever just because of how enjoyable and rewatchable it is. If you don't know the premise, it follows 4 lifelong friends who compete to embarrass each other. The Jokers have to do or say whatever they're told out in public over a hidden mic, and if they refuse, they lose. The Joker with the most losses in an episode is considered the big loser, and they have to endure a painfully embarrassing and hilarious punishment. You mentioned that you enjoy watching the Dropout TV skit where they have to deliver the news without laughing. I'm going to link a 1-minute clip of a challenge the Jokers have to do where they're sitting in a receptionist's office in an office with real live clients in front of them, or they're sitting in as receptionists in an office with real live clients in front of them, and they have to read out names of clients. The catch is that the names they're reading are all made up and completely ridiculous, and they were all made up by the other Jokers. The challenge is to get through as many names as possible without laughing. The Joker who laughs the most loses the challenge. The Joker in this video is Sal. He's notoriously terrible at these try to not to laugh challenges and frequently breaks down crying laughing right in front of people's faces, which is absolutely hilarious. All right, I'm going to take a moment and watch this clip real quick. Hang on. All right, so I watched the clip, and yeah, I mean, a situation like that is funny. I'll tell you one thing, though, I will say, Alex, that does kind of take away from me is watching the other 3, comment. I don't need commentary from the other 3 idiots. I don't need commentary from them. They can be quiet in that regard. That's part of the fun of the Dropout TV. Part of it is that whatever commentary there is, is from everybody that is involved, right? The people that are on set. It's not like there are people sitting behind. There is another show like the lie detector show, the lie detector test show. I watched an episode of that on Dropout TV, and the reason that one's funny is because the people that are watching, like the wives that are watching from behind it and like, mimicking the lie detector, right? They're not saying anything, or if they are saying anything, it's not a whole lot. It's not nearly as obnoxious as like three dudes sitting in a room. I don't know. I could do without that. I can absolutely do without that in that regard. I don't need that. Like the reaction of everybody else laughing, like, in the office and all that, that's cool. Or if it was just people laughing at them from the back, that's cool. But I don't need all the dude bro yelling and shit. I don't need in that regard, to be honest with you. But that's also where the fun part of the news show from Dropout, why that's funny, is not just because of how much Amy is laughing, but also the reactions from the other three that are on set that are also like competing with them and the comments that they make, right? Because they're trying to win in that regard, but also like, they'll put stuff on the news ticker, which that's infinitely funnier, is like reacting to someone's massive failure, like in written form during what they're doing. Yeah, like that's, I love that. That part is awesome in that regard. So I don't know. It would be difficult for me to call it the best hidden camera prank show like ever of all time. It's all subjective, of course, but yeah, I'm sure that I'd find some funny stuff in some of the episodes for sure, especially the try not to laugh challenges. That I think the premise of that in itself, the try not to laugh challenges, is funny. But I'm gonna be honest with you, a lot of the try not to laugh stuff that I find funny is not on network TV or cable TV. It's the Dropout TV stuff or the stuff on TikTok. Like there are some that, like, there's one, like, in fact, I gotta find this. It's from, so there's a group of black, really brown content creators, right? Because I think that the one dude, Chase, is black, and then I don't know if this is his girlfriend or wife, but Melanie, she is Latino. And they do this thing called the Round Table Game Show, right? And it's all these women, and these women are sitting on a couch, and they're sitting on a couch and around a couch, Round Table Game Show, and they pass the mic around, and what it is they're supposed to say a like hilarious quote, like some type of dad joke or something funny. They're supposed to say it, and you're supposed to not only keep from laughing, but you're supposed to do like this affirming, like like this nod and affirming thing, right? So not only do you have to keep from laughing at whatever like hilarity the person has said, but you also have to like nod and affirm, right? So this is a case where these women, I don't know, maybe it's just funnier with women, because to see women like try to stifle themselves from laughing at like ridiculous things, in some cases they can't. They just about start laughing and it's over. But I mean, Melanie, who is, and I've been following like her account and like Chase and Mello, like their shit has been hilarious for the last couple of years on TikTok. She's the one that does like the funny Dora like interpretations and stuff, and like the and Black Card Revoked and all that, right? And so to see her, like, there was one where like she had the mic and she had to say the thing and she had it out there, but like she was doing, I mean, had to marshal every bit of strength that she could. She was crying to stop from laughing out loud, because of course you laugh out loud, you're out. And the idea of this Round Table Game Show is that, it's down to the last person, sitting on the couch or around the couch wins in that regard. So she is like doing she is summoning all strength, all possible bodily strength, and you see the veins popping out of her head, and you see the tears coming out of her eyes to just do anything but laugh. And it is phenomenal. It is awesome, and it's that type of stuff is really good, like really entertaining. So I see a lot more of that is entertaining to me from the internet than it is from even like TV broadcasts. And this isn't bad production value either. The way that they do it, they got multiple cameras. They have really good production value, right? And she, Melanie, has like almost 2 million followers on TikTok, and they've got a YouTube channel, and they do a bunch of other skits and stuff like that. So they've got the production value down in that regard. And there's actually a lot of good shit on the internet that is being digitally produced that people just want to, a lot of people gloss over because, oh, well, it's the internet, it's streaming, it can't be that great. No, a lot of it, there's actually a lot of good stuff out there. Dropout.tv is part of that as well, right? And so that, to me, I feel like a lot of that now is getting funnier than like the Comedy Central stuff or the stuff that we see on cable and like network TV. Not that some of that stuff isn't funny, but there are some creatives out there that really are good and hilarious at what they do, especially when it comes to the whole try not to laugh challenge stuff, which that's a genre in itself, and I thoroughly enjoy it. I really do. All the internet stuff. But all right, let's get to the rest of your email, Alex. He says, I'll try to clarify what I meant when I brought up the Formula One spending thing last flight chat. He says there technically is a spending cap, but the thing that makes it unfair is that the spending cap is at a ridiculously high level than the lower level teams can't come anywhere near that cap. All the spending cap does is keep the top teams from going above and beyond each other. It doesn't allow everyone to be in a level playing field, nor does it stop the more rich teams from dominating the peasant teams. I guess I'm just wondering if this is right, ignoring the fact that it's just the way things have been. All right, so what that actually sounds like, Alex, is it sounds like the NBA. And the reason I say that is because the NBA technically has a salary cap, but they also have a luxury tax that the more richer teams can pay if they feel like it in certain, and it's a bit more complicated than that, but that's the gist of it. And so, yeah, what you're saying is that there is a cap, but the cap is so high that a lower level F1 team can't possibly even reach it, let alone exceed it, and it's really only meant to curtail the big names from being able to outspend each other. Well, that's what the luxury tax does in the NBA, but it's not like the NFL and the NHL where there are other measures to level the playing field for all 32 teams in either league in that regard. I get that. I understand it. I understood like where you were coming from the first time, but thank you for clarifying further, so that now I think we have an even closer approximation league-wise as to what this is. I think it's very much like what you're describing, at least here, sounds very much like the luxury tax in the NBA in that regard. So, yeah. There are questions as to whether or not it's right. I mean, imagine if you're a fan of one of the richer F1 teams that is always going to be in the mix every year, then you don't have much to complain about. But if you're a fan of one of the smaller ones and you think this is bullshit, how come we can't ever get a level playing field? It's never going to be fair for us. Then I totally get it. I totally understand, ignoring the fact, like you said, that it's just the way things have been. Yeah, totally got you on that one with respect to that. Alex has 2 sentences about the Acolyte. He says, I get your frustration with the Acolyte's cancellation. For me, the show just didn't really impress me much in its first season, he says, but I definitely would have been up for a season 2 to see if things improved. That is at least better and more reasonable and more rational and less toxic of a statement than the shit that we've been seeing. And it certainly is not anything racially or bigotry inspired towards Amanda Stenberg or any of the rest of the Brown cast and crew with respect to the Acolyte. So that's cool. And look, I'll go ahead and put this PSA out there. Yes, there are people out there that feel exactly the way Alex does about the Acolyte. There are people out there. Maybe you were even one of them. In fact, I think even Anthony Dorsey is closer to that in that regard, although he's still very angry, and just as I am, about the bigotry and the fandom menace being propped up. So, but there is not everybody that dislikes the Acolyte is a bigot. Not everybody that dislikes the Acolyte is a racist. Not saying that. There are definitely a group and contingent that feel exactly how Alex just said about the Acolyte. The problem is the racists and the bigots are louder than them, and Disney and Lucasfilm appeared to listen to them as opposed to anyone rational. Because Alex even said he definitely would have been up for a season 2 to see if things improved, subjectively speaking on his end. And you know what? That's all that any of the rest of us can ask for in that regard, right? You didn't hate season 1, but you didn't love it either. You would love to see where they go from there. Because, again, this is about, like we talked about last week, this is about giving a show a chance to grow on audiences. Maybe it would have been different. Maybe Alex or Anthony or anybody else would have been like, okay, you know what? It finally found its voice halfway through season 2, and now I'm really digging it and I'm really into it, right? And you didn't even give it that chance, unfortunately, because of all the ridiculous, the really bad lack of adjustments to the streaming age that these studios are putting themselves through, unfortunately, and we are the ones who suffer for that as fans, sadly, with respect to this. So thank you for sharing that bit, Alex, if you will. Let's get to your Star Trek watch update, because you said this week for The Next Generation you watched Conspiracy, which you called a very intriguing episode. Yes, that's a good way of putting it. He says this storyline was set up a few episodes ago, and with all the weight put on it, I was expecting this to happen in the season finale. The episode had a very serious feel to it, like these plot events were of the most grave nature. You usually don't get this type of vibe from Star Trek given how standalone the episodes are. Yeah, this is a precursor to the more serialized stuff that you will see in like DS9 and even in Voyager in a number of cases as well, but it's there. The seeds are definitely there, and you're right, this was planted earlier for sure and did come to a really, crazy conclusion, if you will, with respect to this episode. But he said, Data laughing at the start was simultaneously amusing and creepy. Yeah, I could see that. He said the creature at the end was utterly horrifying. It was on par with the facehugger from Alien. Agreed. Absolutely 100% agreed. It's why I don't really revisit this episode a great deal. It's disgusting and it's awful and it's horrifying. And yeah, the creature effects, I mean, very much of that era and just real grisly and disgusting and repulsive. All of the above, yes, utterly horrifying. Completely agree. Alex says that as of the end of this episode, a lot of the top Starfleet officials are just dead, aren't they? What happens now? Will this be addressed going forward? Well, honestly, they just get replaced by other. There's no shortage of admirals and rear admirals, and what you're going to see is, you saw a decent amount of Quinn and maybe one or two others in this season. You're just going to see new ones. They get replaced. There's enough ranks, in Starfleet to replace those admirals, any admirals that get taken out in that regard. There's always room for admirals and the what we call badmirals. You already ran into a good amount of badmirals in the original series. Prepare for more in the next generation. Not all of them. There are definitely some more good ones in TNG for sure, but not all of them in that regard. And he says, it sounds like these horrifying little creatures will be back given the beacon at the end. I shall not confirm or deny that because that would be a spoiler, good sir. But he says, next up is the first season finale, The Neutral Zone. Live long and prosper, Alex. Yes, The Neutral Zone, I will tell you, it is the first season finale, and there is a thing that, as far as we're concerned, I think this may have been confirmed in Memory Alpha lore, it does foreshadow a future conflict. It does foreshadow something that is absolutely going to pop up in the future. That is all I will say with respect to that, Alex. But you're approaching the end of Season 1. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on that. I look forward to your thoughts on the Neutral Zone next week and everything else that you wish to contribute to the feedback circle, good sir. I will give some episodes of Impractical Jokers. I'll give some clips, some time. I will be fair about it, as I was with Dropout.tv for sure. We'll see how that goes, good sir. But thank you as always for your feedback. It is indeed greatly appreciated. And finally, let's cap off this week's Flight Chat with an email from Jared Cardos titled, We're not defined by what we lose, we're defined by what we survive. All right, very prophetic. He's got a bit of a longer one here. He says, Hey Ray, hope you're doing well. As you might be able to guess by the quote, I'll be talking about the sudden canceling of the Acolyte. But first, some feedback from your past shows, starting with the last Flight Chat. Yes, indeed. All right, let's dig into it. He says from John's email, I doubt we would have a movie named Super Friends, but I do think it's very likely that we'll get a Super Friends reference or joke. Oh, I agree with that. I absolutely agree with that. A Super Friends joke or reference is going to be made. Absolutely, completely agree with that, Jared. He says, also, the article about comparing The Flash to Deadpool and Wolverine was interesting. I'll have to watch both movies again before I make a more solid opinion, but right now, I think I would say both movies do some things better than others. Yes, I think I would agree with that. He says, I feel like in terms of a personal story, I think The Flash's arc about how obsessing over the past and one's grief can hurt you was more well-developed than Deadpool and Wolverine's themes of wanting to be an Avenger, I guess? Probably more reductive than I ought to be, but I'm sure I'll find more in Wade's story in future rewatches. But in terms of character arcs, I think Flash does it better. However, I do think Deadpool and Wolverine did the multiverse and utilizing past Marvel movie history much better, because it isn't just using a big name from a past movie and sprinkling in vaguely creepy CGI cameos. Instead, Deadpool and Wolverine had the cameos play a fairly big role, making their being there feel like a last hurrah. Which isn't to say these kinds of movies need to exactly follow the formula from Deadpool and Wolverine, but I started thinking, what would the equivalent of that cameo squad be in The Flash? What if instead of just Keaton's Batman, we also got Brandon Routh's Superman, Helen Slater's Supergirl, or Linda Carter's Wonder Woman, and had them play an equal role? Deadpool and Wolverine, while pandering some of the cameos, made it feel like there was more purpose to it than, hey, remember the movies you liked as a kid? Here they are again. And The Flash, I think, was a bit more nakedly obvious about doing that. But the point is, both are movies I like for different reasons, he says, though I think I might like Deadpool and Wolverine more after a rewatch. Yeah, Jared, I think I would probably even agree with you on that tip, and I do enjoy The Flash, but I will say that, one of the major differences that we're all aware of between the two movies is, you see how Deadpool and Wolverine, how Adam Levy and Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman constructed that film under the purview of Fox Marvel transitioning into the MCU. So Marvel Studios and all that structure was a part of it as well. Whereas you see how The Flash, other than going through so many directors, going through so many rewrites, was also a movie that was constructed in a dying universe. So I think that is a part of it, right? Were there plans to make the same type of team up? Were there plans to incorporate? No, there really wasn't. It was really just kind of all over the place. And we did have other DCEU members there, right? Batman was there. Ben Affleck. Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman was there briefly, right? It's not like those connections weren't made, but it wasn't quite the same. It didn't have the same feel. Deadpool and Wolverine, as I mentioned in my review, it was a tribute to Fox X-Men. It was a tribute to Fox Marvel. And the movie was treated that as such. It was, that's why that group was put together, right? And that's where the nostalgia came into play, not just because of the grouping, but also because that was a full-blown era of a universe, regardless of continuity, regardless of structure. That was a full-blown time. That was Marvel in its infancy, and it was growing up to be, what it would eventually evolve into at Marvel Studios. And there were a lot of great successes that they had with respect to X-Men, with respect to Blade, even, Daredevil, whatever you say about Daredevil. I mean, I think the director's cut is much better than the theatrical, but however you feel about that and Elektra, Ben Affleck and Jennifer Garner definitely etched themselves into our minds and made a mark in that regard as the first ones to play those characters, and it was in that era. So all of it came together and all of it coalesced, and the Fantastic Four stuff, right? There was just a lot there for us, a lot there for our generation, right? Whereas there was more of a plan. That's really what it comes down to, Jared. There was more of a plan. There was more of a structured plan for what they were going to do in Deadpool and Wolverine than for what they were going to do in The Flash. So that, I think, is where I would agree with you in terms of how different things were, right? I mean, because if there had been more of a plan with The Flash, then perhaps we do get Brandon Routh Superman, Helen Slater Supergirl, Linda Carter's Wonder Woman, and have them play an equal role in that regard, right? And that, of course, changes, the structure of the movie, in terms of what they're doing, but it's entirely possible that could have been the case. What if they went to an Earth where all of a sudden, maybe, Michael Keaton's Batman's Earth had all of those characters or something to that effect, right? Just something more than what we had. So I totally feel you on that in that regard. Although the personal story and the character arcs, I agree, The Flash does do it better, subjectively speaking, in that regard. It's all subjective, of course, no doubt about it. And just as much as I own The Flash in 4K Glorious Steelbook, I will own Deadpool and Wolverine in 4K Glorious Steelbook. The second it is available for pre-order, it shall be done. And it shall be, the purchase of that film shall be orchestrated, and I will, as I do with the other 33 MCU films, I shall own that 34th one as well going forward. No doubt about it. Continuing on with the rest of Jared's email, he says, going on to Wallyu's email, I haven't seen Borderlands yet, but it felt like a wait for streaming movie for me as soon as I saw footage, and considering how badly the movie is doing in the box office, I'm probably going to get to see it that way soon anyway. Luckily, even if the movie doesn't turn out great, this past week there was an announcement of a Borderlands 4 for 2025, so at least there's something new and potentially better on the horizon. That's the video game, of course. That said, while you talking about Borderlands reminds me, Jared says, of how he was able to get past the light bit of trolling I did when he was talking about playing the Borderlands games and telling him that he should do at least one side quest called The Bane. It's an infamous quest in the series in that you search for a gun that is rumored to be great, but makes the user lose their mind. In the end, you get the gun and you find out why, because it makes your character's movement slow to a crawl, and when the fired weapon sounds like, well, this, the best part is that there's no way in-game to turn the noise off, not even by muting the rest of the game's sound. Okay, what is this sound? I want to hear what this sound is. Okay, I'm turning the volume up because I want to hear this gun sound. Let's see. Hopefully it's not safe for work. Can we hear this? Oh, really? 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 That's how it sounds? That's how the gun sounds? Are you kidding me? Those are bang, boom, rat-a-tat-tat. Okay, all right. I'm not gonna play. It's like a minute and 45 clip. That's how the gun sounds. That is ridiculous. Okay, fair enough. All right. Well done, Jared. Well done. And he said there's no way in game to turn the noise off, not even by muting the rest of the game sound. Wow, that is something else. Wow, that is hilarious. Fantastic work on that one, Jared. That might be a reason for me to pick up Borderlands 2. We have that game. We do have that game. Shonda bought that game for the 360s many years ago. So yeah, might have to revisit that and see if she got the Bane gun. I bet she did. I bet she barely uses it because that would annoy the shit out of her. She probably never uses it for that reason, if I had to venture a guess. All right, so moving on. Jared says, also, I wanted to put down my thoughts on the morally conflicted Superman stuff. I'm absolutely with you that it's good to have moral conflicts with his character to make his stories more interesting. It shouldn't be all the time, I suppose. And you can do stories where doing the right thing can sometimes have bad consequences for him. But a lot of his best has been where he's had some sort of internal conflict. Here's a good example. He said there was recently a story called Superman Up in the Sky by Tom King and Adam Kubert, where alien invaders kidnap a young girl and flees across the universe. And Superman is immediately dealt a moral quandary. Does he stay on Earth to continue his duties as protector of Earth, or does he go out into space, leave his planet at risk just to save one innocent life? Of course he goes after the girl, but he's faced with the consequences of that choice, and the search tests his morals and resolve many times. It's a good example, I think, of a Superman who was still a genuine hero, but is still conflicted and human. There you go. 100%, Jared. And thank you. I knew that I could count on you, among a few others, to be the comics resource on this one. I greatly appreciate that. And he says, what's funny is that I also had a similar social media tiff concerning this on a different venue in Reddit, specifically talking about the upcoming Absolute Superman and that line of comics. I don't know if you've heard anything about what this is yet, so I'll give a brief summary. Starting in October, DC is launching a new line called Absolute Comics, with the idea seemingly being that it's a new world that Darkseid has found and is twisting to destroy the supports and things that make the heroes what they are so that they'll serve his ends. In this world, Batman's parents are killed, but he never had wealth or an Alfred to guide him. Wonder Woman didn't have Themyscira and the Amazons and was raised to be a witch in Hades. Oh, wow. And Superman never met the Kents and has lived his life as a loner. With Superman, the writer Jason Aaron has mentioned a few interesting tidbits, like how his new black suit with red energy gauntlets and cape is made out of the dust of Krypton. Oh, okay. So I saw a post on the Superman subreddit, Jared says, which was complaining about how this sounds too much like an edgelord, sad and potentially evil Superman along the lines of Zack Snyder, and that they should just focus on the current Superman who is more the classic iteration with his expansive family. And the point that I made that I was pleasantly surprised was well supported there was, quote, if you can't do different interpretations and ideas around Superman in alternate worlds, then where can you? And if you can't ever play with different ideas and interpretations with these characters, then why bother making new stories, end quote. Movies like Superman 78 were great for its time, but it shouldn't be the only way that character and world should be interpreted, and I wish more fans could wrap their head around that. Bravo. Absolutely. 1,000%. All comic book movies are Elseworlds in any way, right? We're not talking about being steeped in comic lore. You know, so many different, you know, like they've taken liberties with so much of the source material for so many of these films, right? And even a lot of the fan favorites, you know, the fans love to ignore the liberties that are taken because that's the one that they grew up with, and that's the interpretation of the character that they are most strongly emotionally connected to. But yeah, what is the point? If you're not going to tell Elseworld stories, if you're not going to change the iterations, if you're not going to play with different ideas and different interpretations, then why even bother doing it? Why even bother making new stories, right? So you have to decide as a fan what's more important to you, sticking to the tried and true, which means you're rewatching the same movies and rereading the same comics over and over and over again, or are you open to different interpretations even though you have a favorite? And that's what will get you the new movies. That's what will get you the new comics and content that you really want to see, right? Or maybe you don't. Maybe some of these fans, maybe they just need to admit that all they want is to watch the same movie over and over again and to read the same comic over and over again. Maybe they should just admit that, you know, because unfortunately I feel like a lot of them don't in that regard. They try to rationalize it and they try to act like their position is the right one, and it most certainly is not, because there's no right or wrong on this, but it's very close-minded to, you know, just absolutely write off any interpretation. I have heard vaguely about this Absolute DC. You said that starting in October. I'll have to find a way. Perhaps that'd be a good thing to get it on the ground floor with, if you will. Because I know there's a lot of other comics that I need to read. I wonder I imagine this will be available if you get like the Ultra subscription on DC Universe Infinite. I imagine I'll see about that. That'll be an interesting thing to pay attention to. October, all right, I've got some time maybe to plan around that. Jared, if you have any further insight, you can email me on that. If anybody else has any further insight, yeah, I am curious about that because I do need to get back to reading comics again. And there's some new stuff that I know a lot of you are going to be reading and checking out. I would like to read it as well. That'd be a great time, to talk about that on Flight Report, on Patreon and also in some other avenues as well, for sure. But all right, how about this? He says, finally, let's talk about the sad and controversial news of the possible cancellation of the Acolyte. He says this was slightly strange news because I don't know if it was just me, but when this series was announced and marketed, I assumed that it was meant to be a one-shot miniseries, especially with some of the talent involved like Carrie-Anne Moss. But after the season ended the way it did, while I had little nitpicks with the pacing and such, I definitely had the feeling of I could watch another season of this. And I totally get why this was a show that quickly became beloved for segments of the fandom. It's a shame to see the article and the fallout that came from it. I haven't seen any major celebrations over this cancellation. I try not to look for such things because I value what little sanity I have left, but I'm sure the Phantom Menace is being extra insufferable over it. Oh, yes, they are. But Jared says, I will disagree slightly with one thing you said. I don't think this is a full victory for the Phantom Menace. For one thing, much like the anti-Snyder fanatics about his cut on Justice League, the show exists and will continue to do so, even if worst case scenario, you have to sail the high seas to get it. That is true. I also doubt it will be the last show that features women and minority leads going forward. I think that's also true, because this is certainly something that Disney has continued to do even after The Last Jedi, so that's a valid point, Jared. Finally, he says, I'm not fully convinced that it's completely over for the Acolyte. Much like the 180 they did after that whole diner news, I could see there being enough fan uproar that we might get a second and final season to wrap things up. And even if it is over in terms of live action, I'm fully convinced that the story itself will continue. The High Republic era has been well represented in books and comics, and I can see them continuing that story in either format. It might not be the way we would want the story to continue, but better than nothing, I think. Either way, sad news, but hopefully the massive outcry that this news has generated has given Disney pause about doing something that might please the bigots going forward. Yeah, one can only hope, Jared, and I think you bring up some very valid points, to be honest with you, because yes, you're right, the show will exist. Even if it is removed, it's not going to be like Willow. I know people have been comparing it to Willow, and I know Dave the Film Junkie compared it to Willow if they remove it from Disney+. The reason it won't be exactly like Willow is because it's Star Wars. You can't just erase Star Wars. Somebody will remember. Especially this many fans that are upset and irate over it, the Acolyte will not be forgotten. And that outrage and that anger will get manifested over the high seas. People will still post GIFs and clips and whatnot from it. It's not going anywhere. Like, it's going to remain a vital and like a part of the Star Wars lore. Like, somebody's always going to reference it. Somebody's always going to remind us that it existed, right? Unlike Willow. That Willow doesn't have that type of a fan base. Not quite to the level of Star Wars fans, especially not in terms of this outrage. I've seen way more outrage over this than it did over the Willow show getting canceled. In fact, I'd forgotten about it until people brought it up to reference the Acolyte as well. So it's not going away, even if they do decide to remove from the service, which that'll cause another round of very strong backlash if it is removed from the service, no doubt. They can just keep it on the library and keep it moving in that regard. With respect to the diversity of the casting, I think you are correct in that regard. I still don't think it excuses what you've done with respect to the minority casting. We talked earlier about the lack of social media protections from Lucasfilm and Disney when these actors get attacked on social media. And we've gone over the whole list of them as well, right? So I still don't think there's an excuse for canceling a show like this with respect to representation matters. But I do agree that some level of representation matters is going to continue with Lucasfilm because they've been doing that throughout the Disney era of Star Wars, if you will. And that has been good. That has been a boost. That has been something to definitely trumpet, so perhaps that is something that they won't necessarily shy away from in that regard. But then, you say that and it's like, well, okay, well, if you weren't going to shy away from it, then why did you cancel the Acolyte in the first damn place in that regard? And was it really money? Was it really ratings? In which case, again, as I said earlier, that is their own doing. That is their own fault if that is the case. So I still don't have any sympathy for them on that one. And then when you talk about the storyline continuing, I've seen a number of people talk about how these characters most certainly could survive into another series, whether they decide to do another High Republic show or whether they find themselves in another medium. Most certainly the books, the same thing that we've talked about before in terms of like the Zack Snyder Justice League, his Justice League plan continuing out in comics, continuing out in books. And no, it's not what we originally would have wanted to see, but most certainly it can be done. There's even more of an avenue for that to happen in Star Wars because there's already an ecosystem of books and stories and other mediums that these stories are furthered through, right? And yeah, it does require us to, not watch Disney Plus, but, pick up a book, or read something digitally, that kind of, in that regard. Yes, but yeah, there could be a future for Osha. There could be a future for The Stranger. There could be a future for these characters going forward. Yes. Most certainly. And they could show up on other shows. I think that has been something that has been brought up by more than a few fans as a very, I think, logistically real possibility. They could pop up in another High Republic show. And maybe even Leslie Headland will be involved in it. Who knows? We'll see. But yes, there are possibilities for it, whether it is, Disney doing a 180 and giving us another season of it, or putting the characters in other, shows, or even in other mediums. I do think that there is some potential for that, no doubt about that. That is true. So I will agree with that. Very good points to bring up, Jared, for sure. But he said, to cap off his email, now so that this email episode doesn't end on a bitter note, I just saw this and wondered, of the actors seen here, who would you most want to see in a future Star Trek project, or maybe another actor that comes to mind? All right, so he found this, and I don't know where he saw this. But what this is, and maybe this is an image that a number of you have seen before, but I will admit I've never seen it until now. So thank you for sharing this, Jared. These are big-name actors from other franchises that, as far as I know, have never appeared in Star Trek yet. No, I don't think any of them have. But they've got them, and they're like alphabetic. They're not alpha. They have different letters, if you will, right? Like letter A has, this is a younger Keanu Reeves in a uniform from Star Trek First Contact. One of those Star Trek uniforms, right? One of those Starfleet uniforms. And then below him, letter B, is Nathan Fillion in a similar one. But interestingly, Keanu is wearing Command Red, and Nathan Fillion is wearing engineering or security gold, if you will, under the collar. But then the one underneath that is interesting. David Tennant wearing the same uniform, but in blue, right? And he's holding a sonic screwdriver, so okay, he'd be a doctor. Is that what it is? He'd be a doctor aboard a starship? All right, so let's see. So Keanu Reeves, Nathan Fillion, and David Tennant, all in like the TNG First Contact era, if you will. Then there's a big picture, letter D, of Sir Ian McKellen, and he's wearing old school, like we're talking like old school Star Trek TNG command uniform. Looks like he's got an admiral's uniform. All right. But this looks like current Ian McKellen. And then below that is very intriguing. It's Robert Downey Jr., letter E, Robert Downey Jr. in old school original series Kirk. In fact, they've clearly taken a picture of William Shatner and just put RDJ's head over it. All right. And then F is Ewan McGregor, also in First Contact garb with Red Command, if you will. Richard Dean Anderson, MacGyver, and also from Stargate, SG-1, if I'm not mistaken. He is wearing an original series movies outfit, from Star Trek 2 to 6, one of those uniforms, right? And it's he's got an admiral's uniform on. It's the white, and I see the Admiral Pip on there, right on the shoulder. And then Christoph Waltz, that's right, Hans Landa and Dr. King Schultz himself wearing a uniform from Enterprise. It's very, very intriguing. Okay, so he's asking, of the actors seen here, who would I most want to see in a future Star Trek project, or maybe another actor that comes to mind? Okay, so if I'm going to go by the actors here, so again, Keanu Reeves, Nathan Fillion, David Tennant, Ian McKellen, Robert Downey Jr., Ewan McGregor, Richard Dean Anderson, and Christoph Waltz. Of these actors, which would I like to see in a future Star Trek project, or maybe another actor that comes to mind? Well, here's the great part about this, Jared, and this is going to sound like a cop-out answer, but the reality of the situation is that any one of these actors could pop up in a Star Trek project, and I say that because if we go down the list of actors that have been in Star Trek, I will have an easier time telling you who hasn't been in Star Trek as opposed to who has been in Star Trek, because tons of actors from tons of shows, tons of films, I mean, over the span of 56, 57 years, have been in. The Rock has been in Star Trek. Jason Alexander has been in Star Trek. Okay? Like, there have been so many actors across time and space, if you will, that have been in Star Trek. Out of all of these, if I were to pick a favorite, one that I would like to see the most, one that I think would fit. Because here's the thing. It's not just about seeing the actor. It's about how well they would fit into the universe. And I think all of these actors, all 8 of these actors could fit in the Star Trek universe. I think the one that would fit the most, you know what I would love to see? How about this? They've been talking about doing possibly a Star Trek Picard movie, because people loved season 3 of Star Trek Picard, loved the Picard series, so did I, and have wanted there to be the Star Trek Titan series spinning off from it, right? You know what would be cool? Here's something that would be cool. If you took Ian McKellen and somehow either put him in a Paramount Plus Star Trek Picard film so that he can be with his buddy Sir Patrick Stewart, so the both of them can be in a Star Trek project together, or if you put him in Star Trek Titan, if you ever decided to greenlight that series and have, 7 of 9 and Raffi, with Jack Crusher, commanding the Enterprise G in that regard. Yes, because it's not the Titan anymore; it's the Enterprise G. But that would be cool. I would love to see that if Sir Ian McKellen, if he could find a way, because obviously they've acted together in the X-Men films, no doubt, as Charles Xavier and Eric Lensher, Magneto, right? But it would be cool if they could both be in Star Trek. So that would be cool. That would definitely be a great pick. I'd love to see Ewan McGregor in it. Truthfully, I don't know who he'd play, but I think he could definitely be a doctor or maybe even a commander in that regard. I think David Tennant, most certainly. I'm going with the British guys. I think I would go with the British guys first, to be honest with you. That's nothing against Keanu Reeves or Nathan Fillion or Richard Dean Anderson, but the British guys. And Christoph Waltz, obviously, he'd be great. I feel like he'd be Kelvin Timeline. I feel like if they do a 4th Kelvin Timeline movie, he could be the villain, right? Because, Idris was the villain in Star Trek Beyond, so I feel like Christoph Waltz could be a great villain in the next Kelvin Timeline Star Trek film in that regard. So, yeah, these are all great. I would love to see any of them, and the great part about it is that Star Trek is still a continuing franchise. Paramount is going to continue making IP for this, so any one of these actors could absolutely show up in a Star Trek show or a Star Trek movie going forward. It most certainly could happen. Absolutely. Come on. We're getting a Michelle Yeoh-led Star Trek film here in a matter of months, right? That is happening, okay? The great Michelle Yeoh, who just won her first Oscar for Everything Everywhere All at Once. She is going to headline a Star Trek film after having been in she played a recurring role in a Star Trek series for 2.5 seasons. Philippa Georgiou. Hell yes. So, anything is possible with Star Trek. Any of these actors could show up in Star Trek, but I think those are my picks with respect to that. That's what I would like to see in that regard. But that is great. Thank you for that. He said, on that note, looking forward to your next episodes. Thank you very much, as always, for the feedback, Jared. A great insight, great suggestions with respect to some of the stuff we were talking about with the Acolyte. And I love the stuff you had about Superman, and also the absolute DC comic stuff at the end, and this Star Trek question. This is a great Star Trek question. Great way to end the email. Great way to end the feedback session this week. Thank you very much, good sir. Greatly appreciate it. And there you have it. That'll do it for this week's episode of Flight Chat, the feedback circle, if you will. Thank you to all of you who sent in emails this week. Thank you to John. Thank you to Wally. Thank you to Alex De Silva. And thank you to Jared Cardos as well. Thank you to all of you for sending in your feedback. It is always greatly appreciated. If you would like to join the feedback circle, if you have any thoughts or feelings that you want to share with us about movies, TV, or other assorted media, or trips across the country like Alex most certainly did, shared some really awesome details with respect to that, you know where to find me on Threads at the Flightcast, on Instagram at the Flightcast. I've also got the Flightcast Facebook page, and of course I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right, take care, stay safe out there, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.